Hey guys, tonight we begin with the rather tangled lives of the most inbred women in medieval history. Born of cousins, married to uncles, and occasionally both, these ladies were caught in the royal tradition of keeping it in the family, genetically and politically. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Juana of Castile was born in 1479, the third child of two very important people who were also very related. Her parents were Ferdinand of Aragon and Isabella of Castile, the same power couple who financed Columbus, kicked out the Moors, and somehow thought cousin marriage was still a solid strategic move. Juana came from the Spanish Trastamara dynasty, which already had a strong tradition of marrying within the family. By the time she arrived, the royal bloodline had been stirred just enough to be technically alive, but not enough to avoid issues like emotional instability, chronic melancholy, and the occasional unfortunate chin. In her teens, Juana was shipped off to Flanders to marry Philip the Handsome, who, despite the name, was less handsome and more genetically optimized Habsburg. He was her cousin. Of course he was. The Habsburgs loved two things: collecting crowns and ignoring genetic warnings. At first, things looked promising. Juana was intelligent, striking, and reportedly very much in love with Philip. Unfortunately, Philip was less in love with her and more in love with every woman who wasn't his wife. Juana's passionate nature and jealousy didn't go over well with a court that was used to cold marriages and lukewarm fidelity. When Philip died suddenly, allegedly from typhoid, possibly from karma, Juana didn't take it well. She refused to be separated from his corpse. Refused. She had his coffin carried with her as she travelled across Spain, occasionally opening it to check on him. Medieval romantic? Maybe. Unhinged? Also maybe. Her political enemies, and she had many, jumped on this behaviour. Her father, Ferdinand, used it as proof she was unfit to rule. Her son, Charles, later Charles V, Holy Roman Emperor, did the same. Conveniently, both men got to rule in her place while she remained under care in a convent for most of her life. Was Juana actually mad? Historians still debate it. Some say she suffered from mental illness, exacerbated by grief and confinement. Others argue she was just politically inconvenient in a world where being an emotional woman, especially one who noticed her husband's cheating, was basically considered treason. Either way, Juana wasn't just a tragic figure. She was a perfect storm of royal pressure, dynastic inbreeding, and the world's worst coping mechanisms. If there were a prize for most predictable genetic outcome, Maria Anna of Spain would be holding the trophy while her son drooled on it. Born in 1634, Maria Anna was the daughter of King Philip III of Spain and Margaret of Austria, who were themselves cousins in that uniquely enthusiastic Habsburg way. So naturally, Maria Anna married her uncle. That's right. Not distant cousin, not second cousin twice removed, but her actual uncle, Ferdinand III, Holy Roman Emperor. Because when your family tree is just a loop with ambition, why not double down? Maria Anna was intelligent and devout, fluent in several languages, politically aware, and apparently kind-hearted. She brought dignity to the imperial court, along with the genetic equivalent of photocopying a photocopy. Her most significant contribution to history? Giving birth to Charles II of Spain, arguably the most inbred monarch to ever sit on a throne without falling off. Charles inherited not just the crown, but the entire Habsburg gene backlog: an oversized jaw, a weak chin, chronic illness, infertility, and a suspected cognitive delay. He struggled with basic functions, such as eating and speaking, which, to be fair, is relatable before coffee, but less so when you're ruling a global empire. Was all of this Maria Anna's fault? Of course not. She didn't invent Habsburg matchmaking. But she did play her part in the long-running family tradition of turning political alliances into genetic daredevils. To her credit, she deeply loved her son and was protective of him throughout his fragile life. She acted as regent during his minority and tried to shield him from court manipulation, which was like trying to stop a food fight in a room full of starving toddlers with daggers. Maria Anna died in 1696, a year after her son. The Spanish Empire she helped birth into decline soon collapsed into the War of Spanish Succession, a war triggered, in part, because Charles II couldn't produce an heir. Because, of course, he couldn't. If you've ever wondered what happens when a family treats marriage like a spreadsheet formula, Isabella of Habsburg is your answer. Born in 1501, Isabella was the daughter of Philip the Handsome, yes, that one again, and Juana of Castile, also known as Joanna the Mad, though at this point, Joanna the Understandably Stressed might be more accurate. This made Isabella the sister of Emperor Charles V and the niece of half of Europe. Her DNA was less a mystery and more a royal recipe repeated too many times, a base of Habsburg, a dash of Trastamara, and absolutely no fresh ingredients. At the age of 17, Isabella married Christian II of Denmark, a king famous for reform attempts, erratic behaviour, and the general vibe of a man one poor breakfast away from declaring war on the furniture. Their union was, predictably, both strategic and deeply awkward. Isabella and Christian were cousins, of course, but what really sealed the genetic deal was that her Habsburg bloodline was already looping like a medieval screensaver. She was expected to bring stability, charm, and political advantage, and maybe also disguise the fact that her family tree was looking more and more like a wreath. Life in the Danish court was not kind to Isabella. Christian's rule went poorly. He was overthrown, imprisoned, and at one point, exiled. Isabella followed him loyally, which is either true love or hereditary stubbornness. Her health declined during years of court drama and political exile, and she died young, at just 24, from what some suspect was complications related to childbirth or illness, worsened by stress and royal politics. Their children continued the noble tradition of inbreeding, naturally. One of them, Dorothea, married Frederick II, Elector Palatine, a solid Habsburg match. Because if there's anything the dynasty valued more than jawlines and titles, it was ensuring that no family gathering ever needed name tags. Eleanor of Austria was born in 1498, which already puts her at a disadvantage, being sandwiched between the Renaissance and 1,000 royal expectations. She was the daughter of Philip the Handsome and Juana of Castile, making her the older sister of Charles V, and a proud owner of what can only be described as deluxe Habsburg genetics. Her childhood, a diplomatic waiting room, her teenage years, a series of almost marriages. At one point, she was promised to Henry VIII of England, but that fell through. Lucky her. Dodging that particular marriage was one of the few times Habsburg inbreeding may have accidentally improved someone's quality of life. Instead, Eleanor's first marriage was to Manuel I of Portugal, who was not only a much older man, but also her first cousin once removed, which, in the world of royal matrimony, is basically the medieval version of marrying someone from down the hall. She became Queen of Portugal, had 2 children, and was widowed before she hit 30. So naturally the solution was to marry her off again. This time to Francis I of France, a man who had previously been held prisoner by her brother Charles V. Romance. Francis wasn't particularly fond of Eleanor, viewing her less as a wife and more as a political olive branch with a Habsburg return address. Their marriage was childless and chilly. He spent more time with his mistresses than with his queen, while Eleanor spent most of her time reading, praying, and politely pretending not to notice. Despite being married to the King of France, Eleanor remained loyal to her Habsburg roots, and you can't blame her. They may have been inbred, but they were predictable. Eleanor outlived both her husbands and retired quietly into the political shadows, dying in 1558. She was known for her piety, composure, and the remarkable ability to survive 2 royal marriages without causing a scandal, an Olympic-level achievement in her family. Her life was a masterclass in silent endurance. Though she didn't spark wars or scandals, she embodied the Habsburg woman's job description: marry the cousin, produce the heir, and pretend that the family resemblance isn't getting stronger with each generation. Catherine of Aragon was born in 1485 to Ferdinand of Aragon and Isabella of Castile, Spain's power couple and part-time genealogical bottleneck. As a princess of two united kingdoms, Catherine had everything: wealth, education, titles, and a family tree that circled tighter than a medieval drinking song. By the time she turned 3, Catherine was already betrothed to Arthur, Prince of Wales, eldest son of Henry VII. Why? Because Europe's royal families had a charming habit of marrying their cousins to other cousins, preferably in matching coats of arms. Catherine and Arthur were second cousins through John of Gaunt, which, in noble terms, is basically barely related. They married in 1501, and Arthur promptly died 5 months later. Did the marriage include relations? That question would come to define English history, spark the Reformation, and confuse lawyers for generations. In the meantime, Catherine was stuck in diplomatic limbo, a teenage widow living in England, no husband, no dowry returned, and still very much a pawn in the game of royal alliances. Enter Henry VIII, Arthur's younger brother, and eventually her second husband. It's not every day you marry 2 sons from the same family. But hey, the Trastamarras were all about reusing names, titles, and apparently spouses. Their early years were genuinely affectionate. Catherine was intelligent, graceful, and politically savvy. She gave Henry prestige, an alliance with Spain, and 5 pregnancies, only one of which survived. Mary, later known as Mary I. Unfortunately, Henry wanted a son, and Catherine, after years of miscarriages and heartache, couldn't deliver one. That's when things went from awkward to apocalyptic. Henry claimed their marriage was invalid because Catherine had been married to his brother. Catherine, backed by the Pope, insisted it was legitimate. Thus began the world's most dramatic annulment request, featuring theological debates, political threats, and one very determined king creating his own church just to get out of it. Catherine was banished, stripped of her title, and forced to live out her days in isolation, still insisting to the end that she was Henry's rightful wife. Her royal blood may have been blue, but it was also suspiciously concentrated. Her marriage helped shape English history, not through battle or diplomacy, but by reminding everyone that marrying within the family tree rarely ends quietly. Margaret of Austria was born in 1480, the only daughter of Emperor Maximilian of Austria and Mary of Burgundy. She was a Habsburg from birth, which means her family tree was essentially a circle drawn by an ambitious toddler with a crown. From the start, Margaret's life was all about strategic packaging. At age 3, she was engaged to Charles VIII of France. At age 12, she was returned like an ill-fitting wedding gift when Charles decided to marry someone else, Anne of Brittany, who came with better geography. Margaret, humiliated but composed, reportedly remarked, "I shall be revenged." And to her credit, she managed to rule half of Europe later, so fair play. Her second engagement was to Juan of Castile, son of Ferdinand and Isabella, and yes, her cousin. Naturally. The match was designed to cement Habsburg-Spanish relations and keep the gene pool as shallow as possible. Juan died shortly after their marriage, and Margaret, still under 20, was now twice rejected by royal husbands, once by choice, once by fate. She was offered other suitors, including one of Henry VII's sons, but Margaret declined. She had officially retired from the royal marriage roulette. She never remarried, dedicating her life instead to statecraft, art, and surviving her relatives, which was no small feat. Appointed governor of the Netherlands by her nephew, Charles V, Margaret ran the region with intelligence, diplomacy, and sheer Habsburg grit. She negotiated treaties, balanced volatile provinces, and was one of the few women in Europe actually trusted with power. Possibly because her last name was Habsburg, and also because she wasn't busy birthing her uncle's cousin's heir, despite the endless dynastic drama around her, Margaret lived a relatively scandal-free life. She collected art, patronised music, and even tried to teach young Charles some basic ruling skills. A thankless task, considering he was emperor by 19 and related to almost everyone on the planet. Margaret died in 1530 after a relatively minor foot injury turned fatal, because medieval medicine was just a very elaborate way of saying, "You'll probably die from that." She remains one of the few Habsburg women remembered more for her policies than her pedigree, though the pedigree, naturally, was still incredibly inbred. Blanche of Castile was born in 1188, a time when nobles still considered marrying your cousin a power move rather than a biology risk. As the granddaughter of Eleanor of Aquitaine and Henry II of England, and the daughter of King Alfonso VIII of Castile and Eleanor of England, Blanche entered the world with more royal blood than hemoglobin. By the time she could walk, her family was already plotting which relative she'd marry. The winner, Louis VIII of France, her cousin. Not just third cousin twice removed at Christmas. More like, we share grandparents, should we still do this? But of course, this was medieval royalty, where if your intended didn't share a family tree branch with you, it was considered bad diplomacy. At age 12, Blanche sailed to France to marry Louis, whose father, King Philip II, allegedly said, "She is small, but she will grow." Charming. They were married in 1200, launching Blanche into a life of dynastic chess, religious fervour, and politely ignoring the fact that most of her husband's ancestors were also hers. Blanche wasn't just a ceremonial figure. When Louis became king, she became queen consort, and after his death, she became the real power behind the throne. As regent for her young son, Louis IX, later Saint Louis, she ruled France like a woman who knew exactly how unstable her extended family could be. She organised crusades, crushed rebellions, and managed to keep the kingdom intact, all while navigating barons who doubted her because she was both a woman and slightly more Castilian than they preferred. She answered with diplomacy, force, and occasionally house arrest. Genetically, Blanche represented centuries of consolidation, English, Castilian, French, all smooshed together into one determined little queen. If DNA had a warning light, hers would have been blinking furiously. She was pious, fiercely protective of her children, and absolutely not to be underestimated. Louis IX later became a saint, but Blanche was the one who kept him alive long enough to earn the title. Anne of Bohemia and Hungary was born in 1503, which, in Habsburg terms, meant she was born with half a crown and half a family reunion in her veins. Her parents were Vladislaus II of Hungary and Bohemia and Anne of Foix-Condal. And while that second Anne may sound like a breath of genetic fresh air, don't be fooled. This was still very much an arranged tangle of royal repeat relations. Anne grew up knowing she would eventually be married off, like a particularly valuable diplomatic briefcase. And sure enough, in 1521, at the ripe old age of 18, she was married to her double first cousin, Archduke Ferdinand of Austria, who would later become Ferdinand I, Holy Roman Emperor. That's right, double first cousin, meaning they shared both sets of grandparents. Basically, a mirror match. In modern terms, marrying your double first cousin would raise some eyebrows. In the Habsburg world, it raised dynastic stability, and also possibly the rate of birth defects. Priorities, right? Despite the genetic risks, the marriage was politically golden. It united the Habsburgs with the crowns of Hungary and Bohemia. It also produced 15 children. Yes, 15. Because if you're going to consolidate royal bloodlines, why not do it thoroughly? Anne herself was described as pious, kind, and dutiful, which is another way of saying she didn't complain, while being used as the glue in a massive European political jigsaw puzzle. She accompanied Ferdinand on his various imperial campaigns, and held court in multiple locations, depending on which part of Europe needed a reminder that the Habsburgs were still in charge, and still very much into family weddings. Sadly, Anne died young, in 1547, likely worn out from a lifetime of childbirth, statecraft, and pretending her family wasn't aggressively in love with itself. She didn't live to see Ferdinand crowned Holy Roman Emperor, but through her, the Habsburgs had successfully gobbled up Central Europe like it was on clearance. Anne of Bohemia and Hungary's life was a case study in elite inbreeding. A woman born to a dynasty that prioritized borders over biology, stability over sanity, and somehow still ended up producing half the emperors in Europe. Joanna of Naples, also known as Joanna I, ruled from the mid-14th century, a time when marrying your cousin wasn't just fashionable, it was practically a survival strategy for the nobility. Born in 1326 to Charles, Duke of Calabria, and Marie of Valois, Joanna entered the world already triple-stamped with royal legitimacy and at least 2 layers of cousin marriage residue. Her family tree was a Mediterranean spaghetti bowl. On one side, the French House of Valois. On the other, the Angevins of Naples. Her uncles were kings, her cousins were kings, and her marriage prospects were, inevitably, also kings and cousins. Joanna's first husband was Andrew of Hungary, her cousin naturally. The marriage was an awkward political pairing arranged by the Pope, which is rarely the recipe for a happy union. Andrew was reportedly boorish, unpopular, and about as well liked in Naples as plague rats. Joanna wasn't thrilled, the Neapolitan nobles weren't thrilled, and soon after Andrew was crowned co-ruler, he was murdered. Probably strangled with a curtain cord. Probably with Joanna's awareness, if not blessing. Let's call it a mutual incompatibility. She went on to marry 3 more times, to Louis of Taranto, her cousin, James IV of Majorca, also a cousin, and Otto of Brunswick-Grubenhagen, a minor noble with surprisingly little blood relation. Scandalous. If marrying into your own family was an Olympic event, Joanna meddled 4 times. Politically, Joanna was a powerhouse. She ruled Naples in her own right, stood up to the papacy, and supported reforms in a deeply corrupt kingdom. She was even excommunicated at one point for backing the wrong pope during the Western Schism. You know you're doing medieval politics right when both your relatives and the Vatican want you dead. She was eventually overthrown by Charles of Durazzo, yet another relative, who invaded Naples, imprisoned her, and had her smothered to death with a pillow. Which, given her track record with husbands and family, might have seemed oddly familiar. Joanna of Naples ruled boldly in a male-dominated world, married her way through multiple family branches, and died in the arms of someone who probably shared her great-grandmother. Born in 1566, Isabella Clara Eugenia was the daughter of Philip II of Spain and Elizabeth of Valois, a marriage between close cousins, because at this point the Habsburgs were less a family and more a controlled genetic experiment with a crown budget. From the moment she could hold a quill, Isabella was being groomed to rule, which, in Habsburg terms, meant learning diplomacy, religion, and how to politely ignore that half your uncles were also technically your cousins. Her father, Philip II, was incredibly fond of her. This may be because she was intelligent and poised, or simply because she didn't try to rebel or marry outside the family. She was considered a strong candidate to inherit the entire Spanish Empire, but the pesky issue of male preference meant that her future would hinge on marriage, naturally to another Habsburg. She was eventually married to Archduke Albert of Austria, who was also her cousin. If that surprised you, welcome to your first day learning about European royalty. Together, they were appointed co-sovereigns of the Spanish Netherlands, a lovely way of saying, you get to govern a politically volatile region and deal with endless revolts while reporting to Madrid. Despite the challenge, Isabella rose to the occasion. She ruled with intelligence, religious zeal, and the calm focus of someone who had memorized every papal encyclical ever written and still found time to micromanage her courtiers. Her marriage to Albert was reportedly happy, or at least peaceful, possibly because they shared enough DNA to communicate telepathically. When he died in 1621, Isabella continued to rule solo as governor on behalf of the Spanish crown. She took religious vows and dressed as a nun, which didn't slow her down one bit. She oversaw peace treaties, kept the provinces semi-loyal, and even maintained a working post office. Yes, the Habsburgs trusted her to handle war, rebellion, and logistics. That's practically sainthood. Isabella died in 1633, leaving behind a reputation as one of the most competent rulers of her day. Her reign was a rare moment where Habsburg inbreeding produced not just twitchy chins and erratic rulers, but actual competence. Mary of Burgundy was born in 1457, the only child of Charles the Bold, Duke of Burgundy, and Isabella of Bourbon. Her inheritance? A massive chunk of European land, a family line that prided itself on noble marriages with familiar surnames, and the expectation that she'd marry another noble with equally recycled DNA. Her father, Charles the Bold, died in battle when Mary was just 19, leaving her suddenly in charge of the richest and most politically unstable duchy in Europe. Everyone wanted a piece of Burgundy: the French, the Habsburgs, the neighbours, the cousins, especially the cousins. To stabilise things, Mary married Maximilian of Austria, future Holy Roman Emperor, and naturally her second cousin once removed. A solid match by Habsburg standards, where the dating pool was basically just the family swimming in circles. The marriage was politically brilliant. Maximilian got access to the Burgundian territories, and Mary got an energetic husband who knew how to swing a sword and sign a treaty, often in the same afternoon. Despite being a power match, it was also reportedly affectionate, which is downright scandalous by arranged marriage standards. But her reign was short and dramatic. She was constantly pressured by French ambitions, rebellious Flemish cities, and courtiers who thought a woman shouldn't be allowed to rule unless she was sewing something at the same time. Mary pushed back, signing the Great Privilege to grant more rights to her subjects, asserting her authority alongside her husband, and generally doing the medieval equivalent of running a Fortune 500 company with a baby on one hip. Then, in 1482, disaster struck. While out hunting, because aristocrats often like to flirt with fatal injuries for sport, Mary fell off her horse, broke her back, and died at just 25. It was sudden, tragic, and the kind of ending that left Maximilian wearing black and Europe scrambling to claim custody of their children. Her death was a turning point. Burgundy, once an independent powerhouse, got folded into the Habsburg Empire through her son, Philip the Handsome. Yes, that Philip. The one who married Joanna the Mad and passed his jawline to half of Europe. Maria Theresa of Austria was born in 1717, the only surviving child of Emperor Charles VI. Her birth was met with a royal shrug, since she wasn't a son. But Charles, ever the optimist, or perhaps just blind to European politics, issued the Pragmatic Sanction, a fancy imperial document that basically said, yes, I know she's a woman, but she still gets the empire, okay? Spoiler alert, Europe was not okay with that. When Charles VI died in 1740, Maria Theresa inherited the sprawling Habsburg dominions and a diplomatic mess. Nearly every European power challenged her right to rule. Why? Because she had the audacity to be a woman with a crown who hadn't married a first cousin yet. Actually, scratch that. She had. Maria Theresa married Francis Stephen of Lorraine, who was technically her distant cousin, because of course. Their union produced 16 children, including future emperors, queens, and Marie Antoinette. Yes, the let-them-eat-cake one. With that many offspring, Maria Theresa didn't just pass on the crown, she passed on all the chromosomes. But make no mistake, this was no pampered monarch hiding behind velvet curtains. Maria Theresa was one of the most effective rulers of her era. She reformed the military, overhauled taxation, centralized bureaucracy, and modernized education, all while pregnant roughly every other year. It's the kind of multitasking that makes even modern supermoms look like part-timers. And yet, she was still a Habsburg, which meant a healthy level of micromanaging, strict Catholicism, and a reflexive preference for marrying her children into the same handful of families over and over again. The result? an even more tightly wound web of Habsburg cousins, now spread across all of Europe like an aggressively bred royal ivy. She ruled until her death in 1780, having outlived her husband, survived multiple wars, and ensured that the Habsburg name stayed plastered across the continent for another generation or 5. Her son Joseph, or Joseph II, Holy Roman Emperor, inherited the empire, and her genetic legacy continued marching stubbornly into the Enlightenment. Born in 1384, Yolande of Aragon was royalty from cradle to crypt, the daughter of King John I of Aragon and Violent of Bar. In other words, she had more noble surnames than most people had teeth, and naturally, her family tree was less tree and more repeated root system, where half your relatives doubled as potential in-laws. Yolande's upbringing was as regal as it gets. She was intelligent, politically savvy, and, by medieval standards, dangerously opinionated. This made her both a valuable dynastic prize and a nightmare for anyone expecting a quiet queen. Her marriage? Louis II of Anjou, a French prince, and, yes, her cousin. Because nothing says true love like mutually shared great-grandparents. As Duchess of Anjou and Queen Consort of Naples, though only on paper, Yolande was never content to sit still and embroider coats of arms. She was the behind-the-scenes architect of alliances, the financier of armies, and, fun fact, one of the few royals who actually managed to support Joan of Arc and survive the politics afterward. While her husband gallivanted about claiming thrones he couldn't really hold, Yolande ran things. She raised armies, negotiated treaties, managed estates, and acted as the true power in Anjou. Her children were married off to other royals, again, often cousins, and she personally made sure they were equipped with both political advantages and just enough Habsburg DNA to be considered legitimate. Her son René of Anjou became known as the Good, possibly because he inherited his mother's brains and only some of her family's chromosomes. Her daughter Marie married Charles VII of France, giving Yolande influence over the French throne, and more importantly, access to manipulate Joan of Arc's military campaigns without ever lifting a sword. Yolande wasn't just another stitched-in name on a royal tapestry. She was one of the few medieval women who wielded power without officially holding a throne. Behind every weak king and ambitious general stood a Yolande, occasionally rolling her eyes and correcting the map. She died in 1442, having outlived enemies, husbands, and the worst of the 100 Years' War. She was inbred, yes, but also incisive, calculating, and every bit as influential as the kings she quietly outplayed. Margaret of York was born in 1446 to Richard Plantagenet, Duke of York, and Cecily Neville, two people so noble they could barely enter a room without tripping over their own heraldry. As the sister of Edward IV, Richard III, and roughly half the War of the Roses, Margaret's DNA was already programmed for intrigue, bold decisions, and close proximity courtship. So, naturally, she married Charles the Bold, Duke of Burgundy, a man known for his ambition, terrifying military obsession, and, crucially, for being yet another cousin in the pan-European gene loop. Their union in 1468 was less about romance and more about making France nervous. Margaret brought English prestige, and Charles brought, well, a remarkably pointy beard and unrelenting stubbornness. Despite the political matchmaking, their marriage was reportedly respectful, and even, dare we say, functional. Margaret fit in surprisingly well at the Burgundian court, which was less dusty medieval and more pre-Renaissance Instagram influencer, full of silks, tapestries, miniature dogs, and a dangerous obsession with embroidery. Her intelligence and diplomatic skills quickly earned her the nickname the Great Lady of the Netherlands. She played hostess to dignitaries, managed court finances, and even handled correspondence when Charles was out doing Charles things, usually starting wars he couldn't finish. After he died, predictably in battle, Margaret didn't pack up her gowns and retire. No, she doubled down. She became regent and protector of her stepdaughter Mary of Burgundy and advisor to her stepson-in-law, Maximilian of Austria. And yes, that's the Maximilian who married Mary and passed the Habsburg name into even more European branches like a particularly smug virus. Margaret didn't have children of her own, but her influence on dynastic politics was undeniable. She helped raise Philip the Handsome, the guy who married Joanna the Mad and ultimately gave the world Charles V. So if you're wondering where that dynasty's streak of self-important chin-heavy ambition started, Margaret helped raise it. She died in 1503, outliving her brothers, most of her enemies, and the fading golden age of Burgundy. She may not have added another strand to the inbred family knot, but rest assured, she tied it tighter with impeccable etiquette and just enough royal smugness to make it last. Catherine de' Medici was born in 1519 into the powerful but somewhat scandal-prone Medici family of Florence. Technically not born inbred by Habsburg standards, meaning she had at least a few non-cousins in her ancestry, Catherine soon made up for lost dynastic entanglement by marrying into the French royal family and producing a small army of genetically familiar monarchs. Her husband was Henry II of France, not her cousin by blood, but definitely a close match politically. Their marriage was strategic. Italy meets France, money meets military power, and Medici ambition meets Bourbon drama. Catherine, for her part, adapted quickly. She arrived in France with no real influence, a suspicious accent, and an awkward third wheel named Diane de Poitiers, her husband's very public mistress. Undeterred, Catherine spent a decade quietly building alliances, learning court intrigue, and collecting children. 10, to be exact. And yes, most of them would go on to marry cousins, because while Catherine wasn't born a Habsburg, she certainly learned to parent like one. When Henry died from a jousting accident, because nothing screams fragile masculinity like taking a splinter to the eye for sport, Catherine became Queen Mother, and suddenly the most powerful woman in France. Her sons, Francis II, Charles IX, and Henry III, all took turns wearing the crown, and Catherine took turns ruling behind each of them. She was deeply Catholic but politically flexible, which in 16th century France meant occasionally funding Protestant weddings and occasionally arranging for the mass murder of Protestants at said weddings. Cough. St. Bartholomew's Day Massacre. Cough. Her reputation took a hit after that one. Even for a woman who married her daughters into 3 major European dynasties, that was considered excessive. Catherine was blamed for nearly everything: the wars of religion, the court's decadence, the suspicious poisoning rate at state dinners. But she was also a patron of the arts, a brilliant strategist, and somehow managed to keep the Valois dynasty stumbling forward despite constant wars, rebellious nobles, and family dinners that probably required food tasters and a lot of wine. She died in 1589, politically spent but still plotting. Her legacy? A generation of royals who looked suspiciously similar and ruled with a blend of charm, Catholic guilt, and aggressive cousin-hugging. In ancient Greece, falling asleep wasn't just about getting rest. It was a sacred act, a bridge to the divine. And nowhere was this more literal than in the Asclepieia, dream temples dedicated to the healing god Asclepius. These weren't cozy inns or rustic shrines. They were sprawling spiritual complexes where the sick, the weary, and the hopeful came not just for treatment, but for transformation. To prepare for sleep in these sanctuaries, you didn't just climb into bed. First came ritual purification. Pilgrims had to fast for days, bathe in sacred springs, offer animal sacrifices, and often abstain from sex or even certain thoughts. The goal was to cleanse both body and spirit before attempting incubation, a spiritual sleep where healing visions might appear. Inside the abaton, a dark, enclosed chamber, supplicants would finally lie down on stone slabs or animal skins. Torches flickered on the walls. Priests whispered prayers and burned incense. Sleep here was an intentional descent into another realm. Dreams were not random or meaningless. They were believed to be direct messages from Asclepius himself, offering symbolic, or occasionally very literal, guidance for healing. One might dream of snakes slithering over their body, which, oddly enough, was a good sign. Snakes were sacred to Asclepius, representing rejuvenation and divine intervention. In fact, non-venomous snakes were often allowed to roam the temple grounds, especially the sleeping chambers. Yes, people knowingly fell asleep surrounded by snakes and considered it a divine honor. In the morning, the temple priests, many of whom acted more like dream analysts than doctors, would help interpret the visions. Sometimes they prescribed herbal remedies or changes in diet. Other times, the dream itself was the cure, believed to have realigned the soul or spirit. The Greek dream temples show us that sleep, for ancient people, wasn't just a biological necessity. It was a mystical voyage, a conversation with the gods. And if you were lucky, that midnight whisper from the divine might not just mend your body, it might change your fate. In ancient Egypt, sleep wasn't merely the absence of waking. It was a miniature death, a time when the soul, or Ba, left the body and wandered through spiritual realms. To guide that journey and protect the dreamer from malevolent forces, the Egyptians developed sleep rituals that were part mysticism, part medicine, and entirely woven into their cosmic worldview. Before going to bed, many Egyptians, especially the wealthy or priestly class, followed elaborate nighttime routines. Incense played a central role. Frankincense and myrrh weren't just exotic aromas, they were sacred tools. Burning these resins was thought to cleanse the air of demons, invoke the favour of the gods, and calm the mind. The smoke itself symbolized the rising of prayers to the heavens, wrapping the sleeper in divine protection. Then came chanting or prayer recitations, often spoken aloud by priests or whispered privately by individuals. These spells weren't just soothing bedtime mantras. They were active spiritual defences, invoking deities like Thoth, the god of wisdom and dreams, or Bez, a squat lion-faced dwarf god who warded off nightmares and evil spirits. Images of Bes were frequently carved onto headboards or painted on bedroom walls. His grotesque features were meant to scare off anything lurking in the shadows. The bedroom itself was prepared as a sacred space. Beds were often raised and made of woven reeds or wood, and some even included built-in amulets or protective symbols. Special headrests, which look wildly uncomfortable by modern standards, were believed to keep the soul aligned with the stars during sleep. For the Egyptians, orientation mattered. Many aligned their sleeping direction to the rising sun or constellations like Orion, associated with Osiris and the afterlife. If one had troubling dreams or wanted divine insight, they might visit a temple, especially those dedicated to Serapis or Imhotep, where dream incubation rituals similar to those in Greece took place. Here too, sleep was invited through chants, oils, and incense, but always with the intent of receiving guidance from beyond. For ancient Egyptians, preparing for bed wasn't just about comfort. It was a ritual choreography meant to harmonize body, soul, and cosmos. Sleep was dangerous, sacred, and full of possibility. In ancient Babylon, the line between dream and destiny was razor-thin. Sleep wasn't simply a passive act. It was a battleground of omens, spirits, and divine messages. Babylonians took their dreams seriously. So seriously, in fact, that entire professions revolved around them. Dream priests, known as sha'ilu, were trained interpreters of the nightly visions that came to kings and commoners alike. Before going to sleep, Babylonians often performed protective rituals to ensure that the right kinds of dreams found them. It was believed that dreams could be sent by gods like Marduk or Ishtar, but also by demons or wandering spirits. To ward off malevolent forces, people wore amulets, placed protective tablets under their beds, and traced magical symbols around their sleeping quarters, a kind of astral security system. Incense made from juniper, cedarwood, and tamarisk was burned at sunset, filling the house with sacred smoke. This wasn't just to scent the air. It was believed to purify the environment and appease the gods. Sleep, to the Babylonians, wasn't just rest. It was a gateway to divine communication, and the gods preferred a clean entrance. Many Babylonians recited nighttime prayers or incantations to encourage prophetic dreams. These prayers asked for clarity, protection from false visions, and safe passage through the dream world. If someone was hoping for guidance on a decision, whether to go to war, plant a crop, or propose marriage, they might sleep in a temple or under the open sky, a practice called dream incubation. The hope was that the gods would send a dream so vivid, so unmistakable, that it would guide the dreamer's actions by morning. And when the dreams came, they were recorded on clay tablets, sometimes accompanied by sketches of their content. Over time, the Babylonians compiled dream dictionaries, massive catalogues of symbols and their interpretations. Dream of a lion might mean victory in battle. Dream of drowning, expect betrayal. These books were so influential that their structure would later influence Greek and Roman dream analysis. To the Babylonians, dreams weren't psychological fluff. They were messages from the divine realm, and every night was a chance to read the gods' intentions, provided you performed the right rituals and slept under divine favour. In the ancient Vedic world of early India, sleep was more than a biological necessity. It was a cosmic event. The Vedic texts, composed thousands of years ago, describe sleep as a sacred state where the Atman, or soul, returns to the universal spirit, Brahman, before being reborn again at dawn. And like any sacred ritual, entering sleep required preparation, discipline, and awareness. One of the most important aspects of ancient Indian sleep culture was breath control, known as pranayama. Practitioners were taught to calm their minds and slow their breathing before bed, not to fall asleep quickly, but to align their breath with the pulse of the universe. This wasn't spiritual fluff. It was considered essential to help the soul travel peacefully during the night. Vedic sages believed that disturbed sleep could lead to mental confusion, spiritual imbalance, or even bad karma. So rituals were carefully followed. Many individuals recited evening mantras, Sanskrit hymns that praised the gods or sought protection during slumber. A popular nighttime chant was the Gayatri mantra, often whispered while facing the direction of the setting sun. The sleeping space itself was important. It was considered inauspicious to sleep with your head pointed north, as that aligned with the realm of death. South was avoided for similar reasons. The preferred direction was east, toward knowledge, or west, toward rest. People used natural bedding made of kusa grass, cotton, or animal hides, believing certain materials could influence the soul's dreams. Oils and herbs also played a part in preparing for sleep. Ancient Ayurvedic texts describe the use of warm sesame oil massages before bed, known as abhyanga. This practice calmed the nervous system, relaxed muscles, and prepared the mind for deeper rest. Herbal infusions made from ashwagandha, brahmi, or tulsi were consumed or burned as incense to promote lucid, insightful dreams. Dreams themselves were seen as reflections of one's inner truth, shaped by karma, desire, and purity. A disturbing dream wasn't just random. It was a signal that the soul was out of balance. In some cases, dream interpretation required consulting a rishi or spiritual teacher. In Vedic India, sleep wasn't an escape. It was a return. A reunion with the eternal self, wrapped in breath, mantra, and divine intention. In ancient China, particularly within Taoist traditions, sleep was more than rest. It was an energetic reset, a time when the body rebalanced its internal energies and the spirit journeyed beyond the physical realm. To sleep well wasn't just about being tired, it was about being in harmony with the cosmos. According to Taoist philosophy, the human body was filled with qi, a vital life force that flowed through channels called meridians. If this flow was disrupted, sleep would suffer. So, nighttime rituals were focused on preserving and regulating qi before bed. This involved specific diets, breathing exercises, postures, and even the timing of sleep. You didn't just go to bed, you entered a sacred process of tuning the body with heaven and earth. Taoist monks developed pre-sleep practices like qigong or slow, mindful movements paired with deep breathing. These were often followed by meditation to calm the shen, or spirit, which was believed to reside in the heart. If the shen was agitated, due to emotions, poor diet, or even noisy surroundings, the dreamer might experience nightmares, restless sleep, or even spiritual attacks. Sleep environments were carefully curated. Beds were made of wood or bamboo, materials thought to support good energy flow. Headrests were firm and low, so the body's alignment remained correct and kui circulated freely. Rooms were often sparsely decorated to avoid overstimulation. Cleanliness wasn't just a preference, it was energetic hygiene. The position one slept in also mattered. Lying on the right side was considered best for digestion and dream clarity. Feet and head direction were aligned with geomantic principles, similar to what would later evolve into feng shui. Dreams were seen as journeys of the hun, the ethereal soul. While the po, the physical soul, remained with the body, the hun travelled through the spirit world during sleep. If a person awoke feeling depleted or frightened, it was believed their hun had become lost or attacked. Protective talismans or cinnabar-based charms were sometimes placed under pillows to keep spirits safe. Taoists didn't view dreams as mere psychology. They were diagnostic tools, spiritual maps of energy and karma. Sleep, when done properly, was a form of internal alchemy, a practice of nurturing immortality one night at a time. Long before contact with Europeans, many indigenous American tribes regarded sleep and dreams as gateways to spiritual guidance, ancestral wisdom, and personal transformation. Among the Lakota, Navajo, Hopi, and other nations, dreams were not merely personal experiences, they were communal and cosmic messages that had the power to shape a person's destiny or even the fate of the tribe. Night rituals varied from tribe to tribe, but a shared belief was that dreams connected the dreamer to the spirit world, often through the intervention of animal guides, ancestors, or deities. To prepare for this connection, individuals engaged in ritual purification. One common method was the sweat lodge, a ceremonial steam bath used to cleanse the body and spirit. Participants would sit in a dome-shaped structure filled with steam from water poured over heated stones, chanting prayers and songs to invite guidance and clarity before sleep. For those seeking deeper visions, especially young men coming of age, tribes practiced the vision quest, a sacred rite involving fasting, isolation, and often sleeping in nature for several nights. The initiate would find a remote location, construct a small space or circle, and sleep there under the stars with no food, water, or company. The goal wasn't just survival, it was to dream. The dream would then be interpreted by tribal elders or shamans, and often dictated the seeker's future role: warrior, healer, storyteller, or leader. In everyday life, many indigenous communities believed in dream catchers, a now popular symbol that originated with the Ojibwe people. These intricate webs of sinew and beads were hung above the bed to filter dreams, allowing only good ones to pass through while trapping bad ones until the morning light dissolved them. For children, dream catchers were both protective and symbolic, helping the young navigate a world where dreams could teach, warn, or bless. Elders were often revered as dream keepers, individuals who carried knowledge of symbols and could decipher the meanings hidden within dreams. A vision of a bear might signify strength, while a hawk could indicate clarity or an approaching challenge. Dreams were rarely dismissed. They were discussed around fires, woven into myths, and sometimes even used to guide tribal decisions. Among indigenous American traditions, sleep was a sacred dialogue with the unseen. Not escape, but awakening. In the cradle of civilization, ancient Mesopotamia, sleep was tightly interwoven with the divine. The Sumerians, Akkadians, and later Babylonians believed that every dream was a message, and that the night itself was ruled by powerful gods who controlled what the dreamer would see. Sleep wasn't a break from reality. It was an active state of spiritual communication, and preparing for it was almost as important as the dream itself. The Mesopotamians had a rich pantheon of deities, associated with the night and dreams. Chief among them was Nanshu, the goddess of social justice, prophecy, and dreams. Her temples welcomed those seeking answers through visions, especially during sacred festivals when the veil between the worlds was believed to be thinner. Worshippers would sleep in the temple precincts in hopes of receiving guidance through what they called dream incubation. To encourage meaningful dreams, people undertook ritual cleansing before sleep. This might include bathing in sacred rivers like the Euphrates or Tigris, anointing the body with perfumed oils, and reciting invocations to Nanshi or Ea, the god of wisdom and magic. Priests often prescribed these rituals as spiritual prescriptions for dreamers seeking help with illness, personal crises, or political decisions. Inside homes, sleep chambers were modest but spiritually fortified. Small clay tablets with inscriptions or protective charms might be placed under pillows or hung near the bed. These included apotropaic spells to ward off night demons like Lamashtu, a fearsome female spirit said to harm women and children in the night. Amulets of the demon slayer Pazuzu were especially popular, positioned to guard sleepers from harm. Dream interpretation was a highly respected profession. Dream readers, or baru, compiled thick manuals, proto-dream dictionaries, based on centuries of observed symbolism. These tablets categorized dreams by content: animals, weather, food, celestial events, and even the emotions felt during the dream. A lion might predict royal favor. A collapsing house might mean impending disaster. The Mesopotamians were early masters of structured oneiromancy, or divination through dreams. Sleep in ancient Mesopotamia was never passive. It was a ritual, a risk, and a revelation. Entering the world of dreams meant entering the jurisdiction of the gods, and you better be prepared with your prayers, your oil, and your protective charms. Among the ancient Celtic peoples, from the misty highlands of Scotland to the oak groves of Gaul, dreams were seen as portals to the otherworld, a mystical plane inhabited by spirits, fae, ancestors, and deities. While the Celts left behind fewer written records than some ancient cultures, oral traditions and later Roman accounts reveal that sleep rituals, especially among the Druids, were rich with symbolism, mystery, and sacred intent. The Druids, spiritual leaders and scholars of Celtic society, believed that during sleep the soul could cross into the otherworld, a place not of the dead, but of deeper truth. This world existed in parallel with the human realm, and dreams were one of the rare bridges between the two. To access it properly, the body and spirit had to be primed. Night rituals often began with purification using herbs. Mugwort, vervain, and yarrow, plants still associated with dreams and visions today, were burned or placed under pillows to enhance dream clarity. The smoke from these herbs was believed to thin the veil between worlds. Some even brewed them into teas or potions before bed, consumed with whispered prayers to the fair folk or ancestral spirits. Sleep spaces were deliberately chosen for geomantic alignment. Certain hills, stone circles, or sacred groves were believed to be points of energetic convergence, places where dreams could be more potent or the spirits more accessible. During certain festivals, especially Samhain, the Celtic New Year and ancestor celebration, people would sleep in these areas to receive visions from their departed loved ones, or messages from gods like Brigid or the Dagda. Some warriors and leaders reportedly sought prophetic dreams before battle, sleeping alone in caves or forests after intense fasting and chanting. These dreams were believed to carry omens about victory or doom, and were treated with immense seriousness. Symbols from dreams, like animals, colours, or landscapes, were brought to the Fili, Celtic poets and seers, who interpreted them in verse. A white stag might mean transformation. A dream of drowning in a forest might point to betrayal. Dreams were woven into Celtic mythology, shaping both personal destinies and communal stories. In the Celtic world, the night wasn't silent. It pulsed with whispers from beyond, carried into the dreams of those brave or pure enough to listen. In ancient Japan, the line between sleep, magic, and the unseen was carefully navigated through a spiritual system known as onmyodo, the way of yin and yang. Rooted in a blend of Taoist cosmology, Shinto spirituality, and Buddhist elements, onmyodo offered both elite courtiers and commoners tools to protect the soul during slumber and to harness the messages embedded in dreams. Central to onmyodo was the belief that the night was a time when the yin forces, dark, hidden, and often chaotic, were strongest. Sleep made a person vulnerable to possession by malevolent spirits known as yokai or yurei, and to being influenced by bad kimon, or directional energy. To combat this, practitioners used a variety of pre-sleep rituals that combined spiritual defense and purification. One such ritual involved the placement of ofuda, paper talismans inscribed with sacred spells, on bedroom walls or near sleeping mats. These charms were often blessed by an onmyoji, a specialist trained in astrology, divination, and exorcism. The talismans could repel spirits, seal bad dreams, or channel good fortune. Before bed, it was also common to light incense made from sandalwood or aloes wood. The scent was believed to please guardian spirits and create a purifying barrier. In noble households, ritual chanting or silent recitation of Buddhist sutras might be performed to calm the mind and invite peaceful sleep. Those particularly sensitive to the spirit world would sleep facing auspicious directions, never north, which was associated with death. Children were especially vulnerable, so they were often protected with engraved amulets or had special dolls placed nearby to absorb or ward off negative energy. These dolls, called hitogata, were thought to take on the burden of the sleeper's spiritual vulnerabilities. Dreams themselves were frequently recorded in private journals or shared with monks and diviners. If someone dreamt of fire, blood, or animals, it could signify impending illness, betrayal, or divine warning. Conversely, dreams of flying, waterfalls, or lotus flowers might herald spiritual growth or blessings. Dreams were messages, but only if you knew how to read them, and only if you survived the night unscathed. For the ancient Japanese, sleep was not to be taken lightly. It was a ritual, a strategy, and a spiritual gauntlet passed through nightly, under the silent watch of spirits and stars. Long before the city of Alexandria dominated the Egyptian coastline, there was Heracleion, known to the Egyptians as Thonis. For centuries, it stood as the primary port of entry into Egypt, a thriving centre of commerce, religion, and diplomacy, where Greek merchants, Egyptian priests, and foreign emissaries crossed paths in a vibrant cultural melting pot. But by the time historians of the late medieval period were writing their chronicles, Heracleion had seemingly disappeared from history. Its location forgotten, its name preserved only in faded texts and half-remembered myths. Many dismissed it as a legend, a sort of Egyptian Atlantis. And yet, it was real. Heracleion once sprawled across the Nile Delta, its canals winding past massive stone temples and marketplaces. Monumental statues of gods like Amun-Gereb and Horus towered above the harbours. Ships from Greece, Phoenicia, and beyond docked there to pay taxes and seek permission to enter inland Egypt. Its customs house was one of the most important in the ancient world. It was also a religious capital, a place where pharaohs would perform ceremonial rites to gain legitimacy from the gods before their reigns began. So how does a city like that just vanish? Sometime between the 2nd and 8th centuries CE, a series of natural disasters struck the region. Earthquakes, rising sea levels, and a sudden phenomenon called liquefaction, where the soil beneath the city essentially turned to jelly, caused entire sections of Heracleion to collapse into the Mediterranean Sea. Over time, sand and silt buried the ruins, and the currents of the Nile's estuary erased what remained from view. Heracleion was literally wiped off the map. For over 1,000 years, the city remained hidden beneath the waves, whispered about only in fragments by Herodotus and a few Greek scholars. No one truly believed it could be found. Not until the year 2000, when French underwater archaeologist Frank Goddio made a shocking discovery off the coast of Aboukir Bay. There, in the silt-rich seabed, lay a city preserved like a time capsule, waiting patiently beneath 30 feet of water. Colossal statues, shipwrecks, gold coins, and inscribed steles began to surface, revealing that Heracleion had not been lost forever, only sleeping beneath the sea. At its peak, Heracleion was far more than a coastal outpost. It was the beating heart of Egypt's international trade, the first stop for foreign merchants and emissaries before they could pass further into the Nile's interior. Strategically positioned near the canopic mouth of the Nile, the city functioned as a customs checkpoint and a cultural filter. Everything coming into Egypt by sea had to pass through Heracleion first. Ships laden with olive oil, wine, incense, silver, cedarwood, and luxury textiles arrived from the Aegean and the Levant. In return, Egypt offered its signature exports: papyrus, grain, linen, glassware, and gold. Heracleion was the first place where these exchanges were logged, taxed, and blessed, often under the watchful eyes of priestly officials and divine statues. The Greeks who arrived there were fascinated, and often intimidated, by what they saw. The temples were immense, carved from solid blocks of stone, and flanked by statues over 5 meters tall. One temple in particular stood out, a massive sanctuary dedicated to Amun-Gereb, the fusion of the Egyptian god Amun and a local deity. Pharaohs would come here to receive the divine blessing of their rule, participating in ritual coronations that reinforced their legitimacy in the eyes of both gods and men. And yet Heracleion wasn't just about religion and trade. It was also a cosmopolitan city where Egyptians, Greeks, Phoenicians, Libyans and others lived, worked and mingled. Artifacts recovered from the seabed include inscriptions in both Greek and Egyptian, amulets, jewellery, and even tax records scratched into tablets. These finds reveal a city that thrived not on isolation, but on connection, a city that lived and breathed through its interactions with the wider Mediterranean world. Frank Goddeau's underwater excavations have uncovered over 70 ancient shipwrecks, many of which were used to ferry goods to and from Heracleion's busy docks. Anchors, ceramics, and coins confirm that trade was both extensive and regulated. Temples kept detailed records of taxes collected from incoming cargo, gold for the state, incense for the gods. In short, Heracleion was Egypt's maritime soul, a place where divine authority met international commerce. It stood as the guardian of the Nile, welcoming the world and guarding its secrets until the sea reclaimed them. One of the most astonishing revelations about Heracleion came not from coins or ships, but from the massive temples that still rest beneath the sea. These weren't minor shrines tucked into corners. They were sprawling, monumental structures made of limestone and granite, dedicated to gods who ruled the Nile and the cosmos itself. The crown jewel of the city was the Temple of Amun-Gereb, a massive religious complex that likely served both political and spiritual functions. It was here that pharaohs received divine sanction, performing rituals to confirm their legitimacy. Heracleion wasn't just a customs checkpoint, it was a place of ritual coronation, where Egyptian rulers spiritually tied themselves to the divine order, the concept known as Mayat. But the real marvel is how much of it still survives. When Frank Goddeau and his team dove beneath the silt-choked waters of Abukir Bay, they discovered colossal statues, many still standing upright. Some measured over 5 meters tall, including a massive statue of the god Hapi, symbol of abundance and the flooding Nile. Others included statues of queens and pharaohs, carved with astonishing precision. What's more shocking? Some were found nearly intact, despite being underwater for over 1,000 years. Then there were the stelae, giant stone slabs inscribed with hieroglyphs. One particularly important find was the decree of Nectar Nebo Phi, an official proclamation carved into granite, which listed religious laws and temple privileges. Its survival underwater is a miracle in itself, and it offered hard proof that Heracleion wasn't just myth, but a major religious hub backed by the state. Temples in Heracleion were not only religious centres, they also acted as repositories of wealth and knowledge. Offerings from around the Mediterranean poured in: gold, alabaster jars, ritual knives, and incense burners. Statues of Osiris, Isis, and Horus lined temple halls, and ceremonial boats were used in sacred processions, some of which were found submerged but astonishingly well preserved. What these temples reveal is clear. Heracleion was a spiritual capital, not just a trade port. The rituals performed here shaped the destiny of kings, blessed the economy, and bridged the world of the living with the realm of the gods. All now eerily silent, but preserved in stone beneath the waves. For over 1,000 years, Heracleion was lost, buried beneath layers of sediment, forgotten by maps, and dismissed by many as myth. But in the year 2000, the silence of the sea was finally broken. French underwater archaeologist Frank Goddio, backed by the European Institute for Underwater Archaeology, i.e. MESM, made a discovery that would stun the world: the sunken remains of a city that defied time. Goddio had spent years studying ancient texts and scouring the murky waters of Abukir Bay, just off the coast of modern-day Alexandria. The region had long been suspected of hiding secrets. Clues were buried in the writings of Herodotus, Strabo, and Egyptian records, all hinting at a once great city swallowed by the Mediterranean. But until Goddio's expedition, no one had found physical proof. Using advanced sonar and magnetometry, his team scanned the sea floor, identifying anomalies hidden beneath meters of silt. What emerged wasn't just a scattering of relics, it was a fully submerged city. Whole streets, canals, temples, statues, and shipwrecks lay preserved in the anaerobic depths, protected from erosion by layers of mud and river sediment. The first things recovered were colossal statues, including 2 imposing 5-meter figures of a Ptolemaic king and queen, believed to represent a ruling couple who had once governed Heracleion. Soon followed a massive stele inscribed in both Egyptian and Greek, confirming the city's identity. The bilingual inscriptions were a historian's dream, tangible proof that Thonis and Heracleion were in fact the same city, known by different names to Egyptians and Greeks. Over the next few years, Goddio's team uncovered over 70 ancient shipwrecks, thousands of coins, weights, religious artifacts, and ceremonial vessels. What made this discovery extraordinary wasn't just the volume, but the state of preservation. Unlike ruins found on land, these artifacts were untouched by looters or weather, frozen in time beneath the silt. Frank Goddio's rediscovery of Heracleion wasn't just an archaeological achievement, it was a resurrection. A city believed to be legend was now re-emerging, piece by piece, offering a stunning glimpse into a world thought lost forever. And perhaps most exciting of all, only a fraction of the city has been excavated. Heracleion still sleeps, waiting for the next dive. Heracleion's rise was spectacular, but its fall was slow, silent, and devastating. Unlike cities destroyed by fire or war, Heracleion vanished beneath the sea in a gradual, almost ghostly decline. There was no single day of doom. Instead, the city was lost through a series of natural disasters that unfolded over centuries, the kind of events too quiet to make headlines, but powerful enough to erase a civilization. The first culprit was tectonic activity. The Nile Delta sits on a seismically active zone, and Heracleion's foundations were particularly vulnerable. Small but repeated earthquakes may have weakened the soft, waterlogged ground beneath the city, which was built on silt and clay rather than firm bedrock. But it wasn't just the tremors that doomed Heracleion. It was a geological phenomenon known as liquefaction. Liquefaction happens when the ground becomes saturated with water and loses its ability to support weight. Imagine a layer of wet sand suddenly turning to quicksand. That's what happened beneath Heracleion. As earthquakes shook the delta and rising sea levels pushed salt water further inland, the earth literally liquefied and whole sections of the city began to sink. Buildings, temples, even ships pulled downward into the mud. Over time, the city fragmented. Canals overflowed, quays collapsed, and temples began to tilt and vanish below the surface. The bustling port slowly became unusable, forcing trade to shift westward toward Alexandria, which rose in prominence. By the end of the 2nd century BCE, Heracleion's importance was waning. By the 8th century CE, it had almost completely disappeared beneath the waters of the Mediterranean. What's chilling is how little anyone did to stop it, because no one could. Nature moved slowly, but relentlessly. The people of Heracleion didn't flee in panic. They adapted, rebuilt, and prayed. And then one day, it was simply gone. Boats still sailed over its submerged ruins. Fishermen cast their nets where stone gods once stood. The memory of the city faded, until even its name became legend. Today, Heracleion's sinking is a stark reminder. Even the greatest cities can be undone, not by enemies, but by the quiet, steady hand of nature. Heracleion may have vanished beneath the sea, but the artifacts recovered from its ruins paint a vivid picture of what daily life might have looked like in this once thriving Egyptian port. Far from being a purely ceremonial or political centre, Heracleion was a lived-in city, bustling with markets, temples, courtyards and shipyards, a place where people worshipped, traded, argued and dreamed. The city's layout, partially mapped through underwater surveys, shows a network of canals that ran between stone buildings and quays. Boats moved goods and people through the streets, just as carts would have in other cities. Heracleion was often referred to as the Venice of Egypt, though it predates Venice by well over 1,000 years. The architecture blended traditional Egyptian forms, pylons, obelisks, and temple courts, with Hellenistic influences brought in by Greek settlers. The people who lived here were a diverse mix: Egyptians, Greeks, Phoenicians, Libyans, and other seafaring merchants. Excavated artifacts include Greek amphorae, Egyptian scarabs, and gold coins stamped with various rulers' faces. This melting pot of cultures meant that multiple languages were spoken, multiple gods were worshipped, and multiple traditions coexisted, often within the same household. Religion was central to everyday life. Morning offerings to deities like Amun, Isis, and Osiris were as routine as breakfast. Temples weren't just for ceremony. They acted as economic engines, employing artisans, scribes, and priests. They stored wealth, administered law, and even recorded taxes. One stele recovered from the site reveals detailed temple protocols, including the taxation of imported goods, proving that religious life and trade were inseparably linked. Food came from both land and sea. Fish and shellfish were abundant, thanks to the Nile Delta's brackish waters, while inland farms supplied grains, figs, and beer. Markets near the quays would have been noisy, colourful places filled with spices, textiles, and stories from faraway lands. And of course, there was entertainment. Statues and inscriptions suggest the presence of music, dance, and festivals, especially those honouring Osiris, which included ritual boat processions and dramatic performances. Heracleion was not just functional. It was alive. In the end, Heracleion wasn't just a port or a holy site. It was a home. Its people lived ordinary lives beneath the shadows of colossal gods, unaware that their world would someday become legend, entombed in water. As Heracleion's fortunes began to decline, a new city was rising just a short sail down the coast: Alexandria, founded by Alexander the Great in 331 BCE. In many ways, Alexandria didn't just succeed Heracleion, it supplanted it, becoming the jewel of the Mediterranean and the new beating heart of Egypt's maritime and intellectual life. But the relationship between the two cities wasn't purely competitive. It was part of a larger transformation in Egypt's political and cultural identity. At the time of Heracleion's prominence, Egypt was still ruled by native dynasties, and the city's importance was rooted in traditional Egyptian religion and its strategic location near the Nile Delta's entry point. Heracleion was where foreign ships were inspected, taxes were collected, and divine rituals legitimized kingship. But when the Ptolemies, the Greek rulers who succeeded Alexander, took power, they shifted focus dramatically toward Greek customs, urban planning, and administration. Alexandria, with its grand library, massive lighthouse, and sweeping harbours, was built to impress and centralise power. The Ptolemies channeled trade through their new city, bypassing Heracleion in favour of a fresh Hellenistic capital. They imported Greek architecture, philosophy, and governance, and made Alexandria not just a trade hub, but a centre of science, art, and politics. But for a time, the two cities coexisted. Religious ceremonies were still held in Heracleion, and temples remained operational. However, the balance was shifting. Administrative control moved to Alexandria, as did the elite classes and international attention. Heracleion slowly became a shadow of its former self, still holy, still respected, but no longer essential. Then came the environmental blows, the liquefaction of the ground, the rising sea levels, and the eventual submergence of Heracleion. As the city disappeared beneath the waves, Alexandria rose untouched, its coastal position more stable and better fortified. It inherited the legacy, and the traffic, that Heracleion once enjoyed. Today, the ruins of both cities tell two sides of the same story. One lies buried beneath the sea, its stones wrapped in silence. The other still buzzes with life, though much of its ancient grandeur has faded. But without Heracleion, there would be no Alexandria. The old city was the gateway and the foundation upon which Egypt's future was built. When Heracleion slipped beneath the sea, it took with it not just temples and statues, but the everyday belongings and sacred objects that defined life in a great city. And thanks to the oxygen-poor, silt-rich waters of Abukir Bay, many of these items have been preserved in astonishing condition, allowing modern archaeologists to piece together not just what the city looked like, but how its people lived, worked, worshipped, and sailed. Among the most breathtaking discoveries are the colossal statues, some measuring over 5 meters tall. These include representations of Ptolemaic rulers, Egyptian deities like Isis and Hapi, and even monumental sphinxes. Though toppled by time, many were found lying where they fell, surrounded by temple debris, as if the moment of collapse had been frozen in mud. Their expressions, posture, and inscriptions are still visible, testifying to the artistic skill of the city's craftsmen. But it's not just the monumental that survived. Divers have uncovered thousands of smaller artifacts: gold coins, lead weights, ceremonial tools, jewellery, and fragments of pottery. One particularly fascinating find was a cache of bronze ritual vessels, likely used in temple ceremonies, bearing intricate inscriptions and religious iconography. Others include oil lamps, writing tools, and personal adornments, the kinds of things someone might have carried in a satchel or kept on a home altar. Heracleion was also a port, and its maritime legacy is undeniable. Over 70 shipwrecks have been identified, many preserved with their cargo still aboard. Wooden hulls, anchors, and nautical tools have helped researchers understand how ancient Egyptians and their foreign visitors navigated trade. Some ships even appear to have sunk while docked, suggesting they went down during the same seismic events that doomed the city. Perhaps most mysterious are the stelae and bilingual inscriptions written in both ancient Egyptian and Greek. These texts serve as legal documents, religious edicts, and temple inventories, offering direct testimony from the past. One stele confirmed the city's dual identity as both Thonis and Heracleion, solving a historical mystery that had puzzled scholars for generations. In essence, the sea became Heracleion's accidental museum, a place of ruin, yes, but also of preservation. The artifacts pulled from the depths are not just remnants, they are living whispers from a forgotten world, etched in stone, bronze, and silence. Heracleion may be underwater, but its story is far from buried. In fact, the city's rediscovery has sparked a renaissance in how we understand ancient Egypt's relationship with the sea, with foreign cultures, and with the divine. What was once dismissed as a myth, a name whispered by Herodotus, half believed by scholars, is now a powerful reminder that history still holds secrets waiting to rise from the deep. In many ways, Heracleion challenges the traditional image of Egypt as a desert civilization locked along the Nile. This was a maritime city, cosmopolitan and open to the world. Its culture was not static or insular. It embraced foreign influence while retaining a deeply Egyptian soul. The very existence of bilingual inscriptions and Greco-Egyptian religious fusion shows a society that was adaptive, fluid, and complex. For archaeologists and historians, Heracleion is a goldmine, not just of physical objects, but of context. It helps fill the gaps in our understanding of Egypt's late dynastic and early Hellenistic periods. It shows us what a living port city looked like, how temples functioned as both sacred and bureaucratic centres, and how natural disaster could slowly unmake an empire's gateway. But the city's legacy isn't just academic, it's deeply human. The statues, the coins, the wrecked ships, they tell stories of real people. Merchants tallying cargo, priests whispering incantations in temple courtyards, sailors docking in foreign harbours under the eyes of stone gods, mothers praying to Isis for their children's safety. All of that life, preserved under water, silent for 1,000 years, now speaks again. The discovery of Heracleion has also changed the future of archaeology itself. It's proof that submerged cities aren't fantasy. With the rise of sea levels and shifting climates, modern scientists are now rethinking what might lie beneath other coasts. Carthage, ancient Alexandria, even parts of India and Southeast Asia. Heracleion has become a blueprint for uncovering the past in the most unexpected places. Today, its treasures are displayed in museums. Its story is told in documentaries and books. But the city still sleeps beneath the waves, mostly unexcavated, vast and waiting. Heracleion is no longer lost, but it remains a mystery, a ghost city between worlds, whispering across time from a sunken age of gods, trade, and vanished empires. Long before modern dentistry and fluoride toothpaste, ancient humans already understood a painful truth. Toothaches suck, and they didn't just suffer through them, they actually tried to treat them. In fact, some of the earliest evidence of dental care goes back nearly 9,000 years, showing that early humans were far more medically inventive than we tend to assume. In the Mehrgarh region of present-day Pakistan, archaeologists uncovered human remains dating back to around 7000 BCE. What they found stunned the scientific community. Several skulls with teeth that had been drilled using flint tools. These weren't accidental marks or signs of trauma. They were precise, intentional holes, carefully bored into molars. The teeth belonged to adult individuals, meaning they survived the drilling process. And if that sounds painful, it probably was. There's no evidence of anesthetic. Just grit, sharp stones, and a willingness to endure agony in the name of relief. These drills were likely powered by bowstrings, using a technique similar to fire starting, back and forth spinning, that allowed the flint bit to grind into enamel. It's the earliest known form of dentistry, predating Egyptian civilization by millennia. Why did they do it? Theories suggest it was to remove decayed material, relieve pressure from abscesses, or possibly even for ritual reasons. In some cases, the teeth showed signs of bitumen or resin, which might have been used to seal the cavity afterward, a very crude form of filling. This wasn't an isolated case. In other prehistoric cultures, teeth were filed, pulled, and even stained. Among some African and Indonesian groups, tooth modification was common, not always for medical reasons, but as a form of social identity or spiritual protection. Still, the fact remains. Humans understood the importance of their teeth and weren't afraid to go DIY when decay set in. Even in these early eras, dental problems were more than just annoying. They could be deadly. An untreated abscess could lead to infection, fever, and even death, which explains why, in a world without antibiotics, drilling out the rot, no matter how crude the method, may have saved lives. So, while they lacked porcelain crowns and Novocaine, Prehistoric people weren't clueless. They faced dental pain with stone tools, raw courage, and shocking precision, setting the stage for everything that came next. When it comes to ancient medicine, Egypt often steals the spotlight, and dentistry was no exception. The Egyptians didn't just acknowledge tooth problems, they created an entire medical field around it. In fact, the world's first known dentist was an Egyptian named Hesi-Ra, who lived around 2600 BCE during the reign of Pharaoh Djoser. His tomb bears the title Chief of Dentists and Physicians, suggesting that dental care was already a respected profession in the Old Kingdom. But if you're picturing a calm clinic with copper tools and smiling patients, think again. Egyptian dentistry was an intense blend of practical techniques and magical incantations. The famous Ebers Papyrus, a 3,500-year-old medical text, includes remedies for toothaches, infections, and gum disease. Some treatments involved chewed herbs and honey, both of which have antimicrobial properties. Others, however, involved placing a dead mouse on the aching tooth and reciting spells to drive away evil spirits. Not exactly Ada approved. Egyptians also understood the concept of oral hygiene. They used twig toothbrushes, chewed on aromatic sticks to freshen breath, and even made rudimentary toothpaste from crushed eggshells, ox hooves, pumice, and myrrh. It was gritty, abrasive, and not particularly minty, but it worked. In terms of real procedures, evidence from excavated mummies shows attempts at dental surgery. Some skulls show drilled molars, similar to those in prehistoric Pakistan, while others have abscesses that appear to have been drained. There are also signs of crude splints used to stabilize loose teeth. Still, most Egyptians likely suffered through dental problems without major intervention. Their diet, filled with stone-ground bread, introduced plenty of sand and grit into their mouths, which wore teeth down prematurely and caused fractures. Interestingly, archaeologists have found gold wires and metal bands in a few skulls, possibly the earliest examples of dental bridges or stabilization devices. Whether they were used in life or added posthumously is debated, but they prove one thing. Egyptians were thinking creatively about how to preserve the structure of the mouth. In essence, ancient Egyptian dentistry was part science, part superstition. They understood infection, practiced hygiene, and experimented with surgical tools, all while invoking gods like Sekhmet and Thoth for help. They may not have had anesthetic, but they had ambition, and that made all the difference. While the Egyptians were mixing myrrh and ox hooves into gritty toothpaste, the Etruscans of ancient Italy were pioneering something far more glamorous: dental prosthetics. Long before the Romans dominated the Mediterranean, these highly skilled artisans were crafting what could be considered the first dental bridges, elegant, functional solutions to missing teeth that would influence dentistry for centuries. Dating back to around 700 BCE, Etruscan burial sites have revealed skulls fitted with gold bands and wire ligatures holding replacement teeth in place. These weren't just functional fixes, they were status symbols. In many cases, the replacement teeth were not artificial at all. They were real human or animal teeth, sometimes from oxen, fitted neatly alongside the living teeth using loops of fine gold. It was delicate, precise, and quite possibly painful. But it worked. The Etruscans were known for their metallurgical skill, and that extended to dentistry. The gold bands used in their bridges were soft enough to manipulate, yet strong enough to hold teeth securely in place. These were not quick fixes for commoners. Rather, they were custom dental work for the elite, likely performed by skilled metalworkers or physicians associated with religious or noble households. What's remarkable is how aesthetic their dental solutions were. These bridges weren't just functional. They were crafted to restore facial symmetry and preserve appearance. The Etruscans understood, long before modern cosmetic dentistry, that missing teeth altered not just chewing, but the entire shape of the face. In a society where appearance and status were deeply intertwined, this mattered a great deal. There's no direct evidence that they performed extractions or surgeries, but the presence of dental appliances suggests that oral health was actively managed. and not purely for medical reasons. Like their elaborate tombs and intricate jewellery, Etruscan dental work reveals a people deeply invested in presentation, legacy and dignity, even in death. Some of these dental bridges remained in place after burial, suggesting they were worn in life and carried into the afterlife, a sign of how intimately dental care was tied to identity. In a world without dentures or implants, the Etruscans' gold-bound bridges were a mark of innovation and elegance, a gleaming smile from a civilization ahead of its time. By the time the Roman Empire rose to power, dentistry had evolved into a mix of practical treatments, surgical experimentation, and questionable cosmetics. The Romans didn't just inherit medical knowledge from the Etruscans and Greeks, they expanded it, codified it, and added their own uniquely Roman flair. Think of it as ancient dental care with a touch of militarized efficiency and vinegar rinse. One of the most famous Roman medical writers, Aulus Cornelius Celsus, described dental procedures in his medical encyclopedia De Medicina. He noted techniques for extracting teeth, treating toothaches, and even cleaning the mouth with abrasive powders made from crushed bones, oyster shells, and charcoal. Some recipes included urine, which sounds horrifying today, but actually provided a natural source of ammonia, a potent cleaning agent. Yes, Romans used urine as mouthwash. Bottled and imported from provinces like Portugal and Gaul, it was prized for its whitening effect on teeth. Elite Romans seeking bright smiles may have suffered through daily gargles of fermented ammonia, followed by a rinse of wine or vinegar to freshen the breath. Vanity, it seems, can override disgust. Beyond that, Roman physicians used forceps, scalpels, and dental elevators for extractions and oral surgeries. Metal tools have been found in excavation sites alongside surgical kits, showing that dentistry, while painful, was not uncommon. Soldiers, in particular, received treatment for broken or abscessed teeth, as oral health was considered vital to combat readiness. The wealthy, on the other hand, had access to early prosthetics inspired by Etruscan designs. These included bridges secured with gold wire and replacement teeth made from ivory or bone. Like their predecessors, Romans saw teeth as status symbols. A full white smile was associated with beauty, power, and good breeding, especially in the public arenas of the forum or the baths. Even the philosopher Pliny the Elder chimed in, recommending remedies like burnt mouse ash for toothaches or chewing mint for bad breath. His works, while eccentric, reflect how deeply oral health was woven into everyday Roman life. In the end, Roman dentistry was as advanced as it was brutal. Painful, certainly. Effective, occasionally. But for an empire obsessed with control, hygiene, and appearance, taking care of one's teeth was a Roman duty, no matter how strange the methods. While ancient Mediterranean civilizations were using gold wire and crushed bones to clean their teeth, the Maya of Mesoamerica were turning dentistry into a literal art form. For the Maya, dental modification wasn't just about health, it was about status, identity, and spiritual symbolism. They didn't just fix teeth, they adorned them, carved them, and embedded them with precious stones, all without modern anesthesia. Archaeological findings from sites in present-day Mexico, Guatemala, and Honduras have revealed skulls with intricate dental work dating back over 1,000 years. Many Mayan elites had inlays of jade, turquoise, hematite, or obsidian fitted into their front teeth, not after death, but while they were alive. The inlays were carefully set into small, perfectly drilled holes in the enamel, using primitive rotary tools tipped with obsidian or other sharp stones. It's believed they used water, powdered quartz, or even plant resins as lubricants and adhesives to keep the gems in place. The precision of these modifications is astounding. The drilled holes are so symmetrical and clean that researchers believe the Maya had a deep understanding of dental anatomy, even if they didn't frame it in medical terms. And remarkably, there's minimal evidence of nerve damage or infection, suggesting these procedures were not only common but successfully executed. But why did they do it? The answer lies in cultural meaning. For the Maya, the mouth was a powerful symbol, the place where breath and speech emerged, both considered sacred. Modifying teeth was a way to honor the gods, signal elite status, or align oneself with cosmic forces. Jade, for example, was associated with life, fertility, and divine favor. A ruler with jade-inlaid teeth wasn't just showing off, they were embodying sacred authority. The Maya also practiced tooth filing, reshaping canines and incisors into points, not unlike vampire fangs or symbolic glyphs. In some cases, the designs mimicked animal forms, likely invoking spiritual protection or transformation. And while some dental work served ceremonial purposes, evidence suggests others were functional repairs, like filled cavities or drilled abscesses. So the Maya weren't just performing ritual art, they were also treating real dental problems, centuries before European dentistry had caught up. To the Maya, dentistry was a fusion of medicine, magic, and aesthetics, a worldview drilled into every glittering smile. In ancient China, dentistry wasn't a separate science. It was deeply integrated into the broader philosophy of traditional Chinese medicine, TCM. Rather than isolating the mouth as a separate unit, Chinese physicians believed that oral health reflected the health of the entire body. A sore tooth wasn't just a dental issue, it was a sign of internal imbalance in the organs, particularly the stomach and kidneys. And while they didn't use drills or bridges like other civilizations, the Chinese developed a sophisticated system of preventive and herbal dentistry that spanned centuries. As early as 3000 BCE, writings in texts like the Huangdi Neijing, the Yellow Emperor's Inner Canon, made mention of dental issues. Ancient practitioners mapped meridians, energy channels, that connected the teeth to specific organs. For example, pain in a lower molar might point to issues in the bladder or stomach. Rather than attacking the symptom, Chinese medicine sought to restore balance through diet, acupuncture, and herbal treatments. To keep teeth healthy, daily oral hygiene was emphasized. People chewed fragrant twigs from aromatic trees like willow and miswak to clean their teeth, similar to toothbrushes. They also used salt water rinses, crushed herbs, and even powdered bone to scrub away buildup. Tooth powders often included cloves, mint, rhubarb root, cinnamon, and ginseng, all aimed at freshening breath, reducing inflammation, and strengthening gums. Toothaches were treated using acupuncture, specifically targeting points along the jaw, neck, and even hands to relieve pain and stimulate healing. This non-invasive approach was often paired with poultices, mixtures of ground herbs applied directly to the gum or cheek to draw out infection or reduce swelling. Interestingly, ancient Chinese texts also reference tooth regeneration techniques using mineral pastes or spiritual rituals involving dragon bones, fossilized animal bones believed to carry potent qi, life energy. These bones were ground into powders and sometimes mixed with wine or herbs to create a kind of early medicinal paste. There is limited evidence of surgical intervention or tooth extraction in early Chinese civilization, but that may reflect the cultural emphasis on preservation and balance rather than invasive correction. In many ways, their focus on prevention, clean diets, consistent hygiene, and body-wide balance mirrors some of the best practices of modern holistic dentistry. For the ancient Chinese, the path to a healthy mouth began not in the mouth, but in the harmony of the entire body. In ancient India, oral health wasn't treated in isolation. It was considered a vital part of the body's overall balance and energy flow, rooted in the ancient medical system known as Ayurveda. Dating back over 3,000 years, Ayurvedic texts like the Karaka Samhita and Sushruta Samhita contain detailed observations on dental care, tooth diseases, and remedies, some of which are surprisingly aligned with modern understanding. The Ayurvedic approach to dentistry emphasized prevention, purification, and daily rituals. One of the most enduring practices was dantadavana, or daily tooth cleaning using herbal chewing sticks. These sticks came from specific trees like neem, licorice, or babool, all of which have antibacterial properties. People would chew on one end until it frayed, then use it to brush their teeth. This practice still exists in parts of rural India today, but oral care didn't stop there. Ayurveda also advocated oil pulling, known as kavala or gandusha, where oil, usually sesame or coconut, was swished in the mouth for several minutes. This wasn't just a hygiene ritual. It was believed to pull toxins from the body and strengthen teeth, gums, and jaw. Modern studies have found that oil pulling may actually reduce harmful bacteria and improve gum health, giving ancient wisdom some scientific credibility. The Sushruta Samhita, attributed to the surgeon Sushruta around 600 BCE, contains chapters specifically on tooth extraction, jaw fractures, and oral ulcers. Sushruta described surgical instruments for removing damaged teeth and draining abscesses, using iron tools and herbal pastes to disinfect the area. He also recommended cauterization, burning the infected area with a heated tool, for severe cases of decay or gum disease. Painful, yes, but methodical. Ayurveda classified dental diseases into categories like dantaharsha, tooth sensitivity, dantashakara, tartar buildup, and dantaveshta, gum inflammation. Treatments were tailored according to a person's dosha, their body constitution, vata, pitta, or kapha, and could involve dietary changes, herbal rinses, and even meditation to reduce stress-related grinding or jaw tension. For the ancient Indians, the mouth was a sacred gateway, a channel through which speech, nourishment, and breath all passed. To keep it clean, healthy, and balanced was not just a health decision, it was a spiritual obligation. In Ayurveda, dentistry wasn't just a branch of medicine. It was a daily act of alignment between body, mind, and spirit. In the ancient Greek world, medicine and dentistry were deeply influenced by philosophy, observation, and early anatomy. Unlike some civilizations that saw disease as purely spiritual, the Greeks, especially from the classical period onward, sought rational explanations for pain and decay, including dental issues. And while they didn't have dentists in the modern sense, their physicians practiced surprisingly advanced oral care for their time. Greek thinkers like Hippocrates and Aristotle wrote about teeth in medical and anatomical terms. Hippocrates, often called the father of medicine, described the structure and eruption of teeth, causes of tooth decay, and even methods of extraction. He believed that imbalances in the body's four humours, blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile, could lead to dental disease, especially gum infections and tooth pain. For the Greeks, diet played a central role in oral health. Physicians warned that soft, sticky, or overly sweet foods could cause decay. Instead, crunchy foods like apples, grains, and legumes were encouraged for scraping residue off teeth. There's also mention of chewing mastic gum, a resin from the mastic tree, to freshen breath and clean the mouth, a practice still popular in the Mediterranean today. When problems did occur, Greek physicians employed treatments that ranged from herbal remedies and poultices to rudimentary surgical procedures. Tooth extractions were done using metal forceps, often without anesthesia. The pain was intense, but sometimes relieved with herbal sedatives like opium poppy, mandrake, or henbane. For abscesses, physicians used lancing techniques to release infection, often followed by salt or wine rinses for disinfection. Aristotle took a particularly detailed interest in teeth, even noting that men and women had different numbers of molars, which turned out to be incorrect, but demonstrated his effort to systematize human anatomy. The Greeks also documented rare dental conditions, such as teeth erupting later in life, or even congenital toothlessness. Dentistry was not considered a separate field, but part of general medical training. Physicians treated everything from ulcers to fractures, and teeth were just another part of the body to be studied and healed. In essence, ancient Greek dentistry was a fusion of science, observation, and pain tolerance. It wasn't glamorous, but it was grounded in the belief that the body, even its teeth, could be understood, predicted, and corrected through logic and learning. Across thousands of years and dozens of civilizations, ancient dentistry evolved not as a single linear science, but as a global tapestry of innovation, ritual, and resilience. From flint drills in prehistoric Pakistan to gold bridges in Etruria, from jade-inlaid Mayan molars to Ayurvedic oil pulling, early societies approached dental care with a mix of bravery, ingenuity, and sheer necessity. Though their tools were primitive and pain management often non-existent, ancient cultures made surprisingly sophisticated advances. They didn't have bacteria theory or X-rays, but they understood that rotting teeth caused suffering, and they did what they could to intervene. Whether by drilling out decay, using herbs to numb the pain, or crafting prosthetics to preserve appearance, these early dentists, or healers, priests and artisans moonlighting as such, laid the foundation of a medical art that would eventually become a modern profession. More striking still is how interdisciplinary ancient dentistry was. It wasn't just medical, it was spiritual, cosmetic, philosophical, and even political. In some cultures, a bright, gemstone-studded smile conveyed divine favour or social status. In others, missing or misshapen teeth were tied to personal imbalance, or even considered omens from the gods. Oral health, it turns out, was never just about chewing. The tools left behind, obsidian blades, copper probes, gold ligatures, herbal scrolls, are fragments of a story that stretches across continents. They prove that ancient people, often thought of as primitive or superstitious, were curious problem solvers. They watched, they experimented, and they passed down what worked. And many of their practices endure. We still floss, rinse, and brush. We use herbal ingredients like clove, mint, and myrrh. Some even continue ancient customs like oil pulling or chewing neem sticks. Not because they're nostalgic, but because they work. Modern dentistry, with its implants, lasers, and 3D imaging, may seem worlds apart from stone drills and mouse skull poultices. But the goal remains the same: relieve pain, preserve teeth, and improve lives.